Hi, thank you for watching episode 2 of The Truth About COVID from a Stranded Australia. In this episode, I'll be attempting to prove that the COVID restrictions themselves are far more deadly than coronavirus ever could be. I recommend you watch episode 1 because in that, I introduced the foundation by putting the numbers of COVID into context. With that said, please enjoy episode 2, and as before, all of my resources are in the description and correlate with the number in the top right corner, because I want you to make your own decisions, and by providing you with all of my resources, I feel that is the best way that we can both say, at least now we have a common ground. I've studied the figures, and here's my conclusion, and then now you can say you've studied the figures, and there's your conclusion. So please enjoy episode 2 of The Truth About COVID from a Stranded Australia. Episode 3 coming soon. Two-class system. I don't understand why there are so many campaigns championing the notion that not only should the vaccine be mandatory for all age groups, but getting the vaccine should be the qualifying factor in whether you can go into a shopping mall, work out at the gym, get medical care, go into restaurants and cinemas, get a job, get paid, receive organ transplants, participate in the global economy as either a consumer or producer, and more. To illustrate, Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, took pride in confirming that New Zealand has become a two-class system, where the vaccinated are the upper privileged class and the unvaccinated are the lower class.
So you basically said this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so yep.
We call this a medical apartheid, separating the society into two. The privileged who enjoy the best facilities and services in luxury, and the underprivileged who are afforded the scraps left behind and forced to struggle to make ends meet. In New Zealand, government wields biggest stick yet with no jab, no job policy in health and education. The government is wielding a bigger stick over the unvaccinated, after mandating healthcare, schools and early childhood staff be vaccinated against COVID-19 or lose their jobs by the end of the year, as it makes another major push for its vaccine rollout to outpace the virus. The no jab, no job policy is one of the latest means to make life increasingly hard for those who haven't taken up the Pfizer vaccine. The new no jab, no job policy means that poverty and financial distress is guaranteed for those who do not want or do not need the jab. Essentially, you are forcing a medical procedure on the entire population, regardless of age, health, or vulnerability. Historical parallels to the vaccine passport. It is draconian and a free fall down the rabbit hole to complete authoritarian government control, the likes of which we saw exhibited in Nazi Germany, where police officers monitored checkpoints where citizens had to produce papers or be apprehended. Specifically, the Ahnen Pass literally translates as Ancestor Pass. This is most famously depicted in the 1942 film Casablanca.
May we see your papers?
I don't think I have them on me.
In that case, we'll have to ask you to come along.
Wait, it's possible that, yes. Here they are.
These papers expired 3 weeks ago. You'll have to come along.
Halt!
This police state used ruthless and cruel methods throughout Germany to identify and arrest political opponents and others who refused to obey laws and policies of the Nazi regime. They went from door to door looking for Hitler's enemies and others who had spoken out against the Nazi party. The Wikipedia article on the Ahnen Pass gives a glimpse into what life was like during the introduction of this authoritarian regime. As I read this to you, I want you to ponder the parallels with our current pandemic. The Ahnen Pass, literally Ancestor Pass, documented the Aryan lineage of people of German blood in Nazi Germany. The actual primary objective was to create extensive profiling based on racial data. One important law, issued on the 7th of April 1933, after the Nazi assumption of power, was called the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service. And it required all public servants to be of Aryan descent. The Ahnen Pass could be issued to citizens of other countries if they were of German blood. The applicable fields were later enlarged under different laws to include lawyers, teachers, and medical doctors, and required a Peruvian Aryan lineage even to attend high school or get married. Usually, the lineage was investigated 2 generations back. Holding an Aryan pass was not on record. The document was shown whenever proof of Aryan descent was required. Opposition clergy helped many racially persecuted individuals by providing them with false certificates of ancestry necessary for survival. I can only imagine what that would be like. If I simply replaced German blood with antibodies or vaccinated blood, and racial with medical, could you tell the difference? Life is extremely difficult in many countries if you're not vaccinated and don't have the right blood. You're divided into vaccinated and unvaccinated, with oftentimes the need to show proof of vaccinations just to enter supermarkets, schools, restaurants, and even undertake basic medical procedures. For example, Dr. Chris Perry, the Queensland President of the Australian Medical Association, had an appearance on Channel 9's The Today Show, where he paints a picture of the foreseeable future if you refuse to comply to get the COVID pass.
Well, more now on those major changes to Queensland's COVID rules, with a clear line drawn in the sand between the vaccinated and unvaccinated.
We're joined now by the Queensland President of the Australian Medical Association, Dr. Chris Perry.
If you're not vaccinated, it's going to be very, very hard to maintain a job, to be able to go anywhere. People having weddings are going to have to weed out the unvaccinated. The pubs and the clubs are going to have to, find out whether people are vaccinated before they allow them in. Otherwise, their businesses will go bankrupt. When people are double vaccinated, it's a much less of a problem. We're coming up to summer. You'll still need to wear masks at airports, in public transport when you're close to people. I think they're letting people be a bit more sensible. I'll still have to have a mask when I'm getting anywhere near a patient. That will probably be for another year or 2.
This is a smart play from the Premier. There's no doubt about it, that you have to try and get people to lose something in order to get something.
Oh, they're crazy not to get vaccinated. Life will be miserable without being vaccinated. You won't be able to get any, you won't be able to hide, you won't be able to get a doctor to sign off that you got an exclusion, because there's quite set rules on that, and doctors will be audited to see every one of their exclusions will be looked at very carefully. They'll get fined, they can get struck off. The patients who tell lies can be charged with fraud. There's a whole pile of issues, whole pile of problems if you try and get around the system. It's going to be very hard to maintain your employment if you're not vaccinated. You won't be able to go anywhere for any entertainment. So by all means, get vaccinated. You've got another week where you can get double vaccinated before the 15th to 17th of December, when it's definitely coming in. And there'll be proof that you've been vaccinated, firm proof. You'll be asked to show going into most venues. So get vaccinated, otherwise you're going to have a very, very lonely life, and you're not going to be able to maintain your employment. I don't think people can be relaxed about it anymore. Their livelihood is on the line. And look, I saw a young lady yesterday I looked after her 30 years ago with cystic fibrosis. She had a double lung transplant 2 years ago. Very, very rightly worried about being exposed to unvaccinated people. I've got to separate the unvaccinated in my office from the vaccinated. We really have to look after the vulnerable. We have to look after the Aboriginal people who also have unusual conspiracy theories. We've got to protect them because they're very prone to respiratory diseases, and we could lose a generation of elders if the Aboriginal people don't get the jab.
And the take-up is pretty low in some of those areas. It's a big concern. Doctor, always good to talk to you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Doctor.
Regrettably, some are forced into a position where they take the vaccine just to be able to live and have this special COVID green pass that they can produce on request of the authorities. This is the camp I am in. I am double vaccinated with Pfizer, despite having a 99.836% survival rate if I get COVID and a strong immune system. I took the vaccine not because I am scared of catching COVID, not because I am overwhelmed by the benefits of the vaccine, but 100% purely for logistical purposes. I can't go back home to Australia. My visa in the UK is about to expire. I need to find a new country to take me in, or I'll get deported from the UK, sent to Australia, who will reject me. Then I'll have to live in the airport like Tom Hanks in the terminal. The only way I can get on a plane and work in a country like the UAE is to be double vaccinated. So here I am. This is why the word authoritarian, police state, medical tyranny, or medical apartheid is constantly thrown around. Do you trust the government enough to not take things too far this time? Australia, one of the most notoriously chill people in the world.
One thing I know about Aussies don't give a shit about stuff. Aussies are so understated. Like a volcano could erupt in the middle of Queen Street and someone would go, it's a bit hot.
Have taken COVID regulations so far, even the Chinese Communist Party criticised Australia for deploying soldiers to patrol the streets to enforce social distancing and mask mandates. But I'm sure they're not going to go too far and build quarantine camps, for example. Oh wait, they're already constructing them, scarily with a completion date of mid-2022. Queensland quarantine facility to be built by mid-2022. Now, before you claim that I'm comparing COVID regulations, vaccines, mask mandates, and social distancing to the Holocaust, I'm not. That is a ridiculous comparison. I 100% agree with the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, that to compare COVID-19 rules to the slaughter of millions in the Holocaust is disgusting, wrong, and has no place in our society. I absolutely agree. I am simply making parallels with the limit of access based on possession of a special pass, as the next paragraph states. Vaccine passports refer to documentation that would allow those who have been vaccinated against COVID-19 to access public spaces such as gyms, malls, museums, or theatres that would require such proof in the future. That is, as we saw earlier, exactly the same function the Ahnen Pass served, except medical instead of racial. In Nazi Germany, if you didn't have updated documents, you were denied entrance to basic services, making your life difficult. Whereas now, if you don't have an updated COVID pass, you're denied entrance into basic services, making your life difficult. Similar to how Austria, from the 15th of November 2021, had their police force conduct random checks to enforce COVID lockdowns for the unvaccinated. Unvaccinated people who breach the lockdown rules face fines up to €500 or $567, and anyone who refuses to comply with vaccination status checks could be fined €1,450. The fresh restrictions apply to everyone over the age of 12 who has not had 2 doses of the vaccine. You're fooling yourself if you don't see the parallels between this modern Western Europe photo of police checking documents and this historic photo from Western Europe of police checking documents. No parallels with the Holocaust, just the Ahnen Pass. The deadliest part of the pandemic. I reject the counter-argument that the vaccine passport is designed to save lives and protect the public, because the lockdown measures designed to save lives are the most dangerous aspect of COVID-19. COVID restrictions lower life expectancy and raise mortality rates. According to a 2020 journal article published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, titled "The Long-Term Impacts of COVID-19 Unemployment Shock on Life Expectancy and Mortality Rates," they write, "We use our results to assess the long-term effects of COVID-19 economic recession on mortality and life expectancy. We estimate the size of the COVID-19 related unemployment to be 2 to 5 times larger than the typical unemployment shock, depending on race and gender, resulting in a 3% increase in mortality rate and a 0.5 drop in life expectancy over the next 15 years for the overall American population. We also predict that the shock will disproportionately affect African Americans and women over a short horizon, while white men might suffer large consequences over longer horizons. These figures translate in a staggering 0.89 million additional deaths over the next 15 years. COVID restrictions are literally increasing mortality rates and decreasing life expectancy, with African Americans and women being disproportionately affected. The takeaway? The pro-lockdown mob are racist and sexist, since the policies they champion disproportionately affect people of colour and women. Cancelled. COVID restrictions harms mental health and promotes substance dependency. Nearly 1 million more people in England are now addicted to alcohol as a result of COVID lockdowns, official data suggests. Exclusive, nearly 2.5 million Britons drank more than 50 units a week by June. The biggest increase in dangerous drinking was in people over the age of 65 and older. Dr. Tony Rao warned the impact of lockdowns on drinking had been devastating. Nearly 1 million people in England became addicted to alcohol as a result of the COVID lockdowns, official data suggests. Dr. Tony Rao, a world-renowned expert on alcohol misuse in older people at King's College London, warned the impact of lockdowns had been devastating. It comes after Public Health England figures last month revealed deaths directly caused by alcohol soared by 20% during the first year of the pandemic. Dr. Rao, a clinical research fellow, told Mail Online the impact of the COVID pandemic on alcohol use has been devastating. The latest data, taken together with the highest number of alcohol-specific deaths on record, is a stark warning for government.
1 day working from home. 2 days.
COVID restrictions are giving 5-year-olds panic attacks. Panicked 5-year-olds scared of play dates. 5-year-olds are suffering panic attacks about meeting their friends, NHS leaders have said, amidst warning that 1.5 million children will need mental health treatment in the wake of repeated lockdowns. Experts said young children had become increasingly anxious, with some fearful of leaving their homes amid an explosion in locked-in trauma across the country. Experts said many children are suffering behavioural problems as a result of lockdowns. COVID restrictions hinders education. Rutgers University bars unvaccinated student from attending virtual classes. No COVID pass, no education. COVID restrictions kill 29 times more people with poverty in South Africa alone. In South Africa, actuaries who study risk found that lockdown disaster dwarfs COVID-19. According to pandemic models, the same model used by the UK, when examined, they revealed that the lockdown will lead to 29 times more lives lost than the harm it seeks to prevent from COVID-19 in South Africa. Millions predicted to develop tuberculosis as a result of COVID-19 lockdowns. With attention focused on coronavirus, undiagnosed and untreated tuberculosis cases will cause 1.4 million to die, research suggests. The head of a global partnership to end tuberculosis said she is sickened by research that revealed millions more people are expected to contract the disease as a result of COVID-19 restrictions. Up to 63 million more people are predicted to develop tuberculosis between now and 2025. And 1.4 million people are expected to die as cases go undiagnosed and untreated during lockdown. This will set back global efforts to end tuberculosis by 5 to 8 years. Ridiculous. The fact that we have rolled back to 2013 figures and we have so many people dying. This for me is sickening, said Lucia Diti, Executive Director of the Stop Tuberculosis Partnership. I am outraged that just by not being able to control what we do and forgetting about programs that exist, we lose so much, starting with the loss of lives of people. Coronavirus restrictions creates one of the biggest hunger and poverty crises in history. German minister admits lockdown will kill more than COVID-19 does. Germany's Minister of Economic Cooperation and Development, Gerd Müller, has warned that lockdown measures throughout the globe will end up killing more people than the coronavirus itself. In an interview with German newspaper Handelsblatt, Müller warned that the response to the global pandemic has resulted in one of the biggest hunger and poverty crises in history. Müller warned that further damage will be done if draconian measures continue to be enacted by governments. We expect an additional 400,000 deaths from malaria and HIV this year on the African continent alone. Müller emphasized, adding that 500,000 more will die from tuberculosis. The supply of food and medication is no longer guaranteed. COVID restrictions prevent essential life-saving procedures from taking place.
Medical professionals in South Australia are calling for urgent action this morning following shocking revelations about the deaths of 4 babies. The newborns were denied life-saving heart surgery because it wasn't available in Adelaide and they couldn't be transferred interstate because of travel restrictions. Adelaide is the only capital city in mainland Australia that doesn't have its own infant cardiac unit. As one obstetrician said yesterday, quote, "I shall leave it to you to imagine the profound effect of these deaths on the parents." The South Australian Premier will join us a little later in the program as well.
COVID restrictions cause more cancer deaths. Cancer crisis replacing COVID emergency as 300,000 miss urgent checks. England is at risk of replacing the COVID crisis with a cancer crisis, with more than 300,000 people missing urgent checks since the start of the pandemic, experts have warned. Official statistics show that in the 12 months ending in March, 304,555 fewer patients were given an urgent referral to hospital by their GP because of suspected cancer. The number referred for breast cancer checked alone dropped by more than 20,000 in 2020 to 2021, the analysis by Cancer Research UK showed. In some cases, treatment was put on hold to allow hospitals to cope with an influx of COVID patients and to protect cancer patients from virus infections. Cancer Research UK's chief executive, Michelle Mitchell, said, "The UK faces the real possibility of COVID-19 crisis being replaced with a cancer crisis." The statistics show the numbers starting treatment who were referred as an urgent case dropped by more than 17,000, increasing the risk of later diagnosis when treatment is less likely to be successful. The charity said the devastating figures showed Britain was at risk of walking into a cancer crisis that could set back survival for the first time in generations. COVID restrictions caused mass malnutrition amongst poorer countries. According to UNICEF, an additional 6.7 million children under the age of 5 could suffer from wasting this year due to COVID-19. An additional 6.7 million children under the age of 5 could suffer from wasting and therefore become dangerously undernourished in 2020 as a result of the socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, UNICEF has warned. It's been 7 months since the first COVID-19 cases were reported, and it is increasingly clear that the repercussions of the pandemic are causing more harm to children than the disease itself, said UNICEF Executive Director Henrietta Fore. Household poverty and food insecurity rates have increased. Essential nutrition services and supply chains have been disrupted. Food prices have soared. As a result, the quality of children's diet has gone down and malnutrition rates will go up. So, no, COVID restrictions have nothing to do with healthcare, the greater good, or even safety. It's 100% political and does no good. Are the death figures accurate? Now, if you do some digging, you'll find a story circulating May 2021 that reports COVID deaths may be double the official figures. New analysis finds global COVID death toll is double official estimates. Global COVID-19 death toll more than double official estimates, according to the IHME, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. COVID-19 study claims real global deaths are twice official figures. Global deaths from COVID-19 are not 3.27 million, as official figures suggest, but 6.93 million up to the 3rd of May, a new analysis based on changes in overall mortality claims.
Well, if the COVID deaths are actually double, surely that makes a big difference. That's probably why the survival rates are so high. Some deaths were uncounted. We should account for all deaths associated with COVID, then and only then will we have an accurate COVID death and survival rate.
Are you sure about that?
In response, I leave you with this.
Well, Simon, today the Ministry of Health added another death to its COVID-19 recording. A man named Robert Hart sustained serious gunshot injuries outside a Newland motel last week, and he died despite first aid attempts. Now, since his death, health authorities say he tested positive for COVID-19. So then you have to ask how someone who sustained these types of injuries and then died ends up as part of our COVID-19 death tally. Now, the Ministry of Health says that's because under the World Health Organization guidelines, anyone who dies while also having an acute COVID-19 infection is recorded as part of a nation's death tally, whatever the cause of death.
Essentially, if you had COVID at any point within your last 28 days on Earth, no matter the cause of death, it's a COVID death. This man in New Zealand was literally shot to death, and his cause of death is COVID. If anything, I'm willing to bet that the COVID death figures are actually lower, not higher, considering gunshot victims are counted in the COVID death toll. Remember when you couldn't confuse this, an obvious meme, with an actual headline?
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Dishonest fear-mongering by the media. I hope you can see why I don't trust a word that comes out of the government, politicians, experts, and the media's mouth about COVID. I haven't found a single truthful statement yet. If anything, after almost 2 weeks of obsessive research to make this video, I haven't found a single time where the official narrative was honest. For example, NHS urges people to book jabs as hospitals see 14 times more coronavirus patients than this time last year. COVID hospital admissions 14 times higher than this time in 2020. This time, they mean November. So the media is claiming that COVID patients in November 2021 are 14 times higher than November 2020. The only problem with that is, it's a lie. The latest November 2021 data we have on COVID patients in the NHS is the 7th of November. As you can see, a few hundred here and there and some thousands at the beginning of the month. Now let's compare it with 2020. Remember, we should see these numbers 14 times fewer. Hard to compare, so let me put them side by side. What do you see? Are these figures 14 times greater than these figures? Is it so serious that everyone needs to quickly get your vaccines to slow the spread and save the population? Or is it fear-mongering? Here is this same data represented as a line graph. Are you telling me that this lower line with less values is 14 times greater than this much greater line? Here's another example. The UK has one of the highest COVID infection rates in the world right now. Here's why. Oh my god, how bad is it? 50,000 new COVID cases a day. Oh geez, let's read and find out more. Meanwhile, hospitalisations and deaths have been steadily increasing since the summer when COVID restrictions in England were lifted on the 19th of July. Pubs, restaurants and nightclubs reopened and mask wearing became, for the most part, voluntary. Oh no, hospitalisations and deaths have been steadily increasing. And it all happened when we lifted the COVID restrictions? Lifting the COVID restrictions must be the cause. So when I look at patients admitted to hospital with COVID, it should show a steadily increasing line since mid to late July when COVID restrictions were lifted, right? And it's a lie. It's either flatlined or decreased. That's one fluctuating horizontal, steadily increasing trend line. Even Joe Biden said, well, I'm not quite sure what he said.
COVID has taken this year, just since the outbreak, has taken more than 100 years. Look, here's the lives, when you think about it, more lives this year than any other year for the past 100 years.
Hey, why don't you get some ice cream and have a rest?
Chocolate chip.
Groundbreaking news. I have uncovered the rule of thumb to navigate the coronavirus plague. If the media and politicians claim the worst is about to begin, throw those fear-mongering thoughts of theirs in the bin. Now, let's apply this new rule of ours with the South African variant, Omicron. Media and politicians claim Belgium implements package of strict measures. You could say that this is COVID-21 instead of 19. It is 3 times more infectious than the original virus. The new COVID variant could well defeat the vaccine, Cabinet Minister warns. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said ministers wanted to take a safety-first approach to the variant over fears it may be able to evade the protection of existing vaccines. World races to contain new threat, the Omicron variant. Stocks and oil prices drop as the world reacts to the new coronavirus variant Omicron. Omicron, a new COVID-19 variant with a high number of mutations, sparks travel bans and worries scientists. New travel variant of concern and named Omicron. Heavily mutated coronavirus variants put scientists on alert. World Health Organization classifies new variant as highly transmissible virus. Countries ban travelers from South Africa over COVID variant. US to restrict travel from South Africa and other countries as it assesses risk of new Omicron variant. A new COVID-19 variant could show immune system evasion and enhanced transmissibility, South African scientists warn. And of course, Australia overreacted too. Australia slams its borders shut to Omicron-hit countries in Africa, as returning Aussies will go into quarantine in bid to keep new super infectious variant out of the country. That is the picture that mass media, politicians and mainstream science is painting about the new Omicron variant. But remember the rule of thumb: if the media and politicians claim the worst is about to begin, throw those fear-mongering thoughts of theirs in the bin. So what's the truth? Let's ask Dr. Angelique Coetzee, Chair of the South African Medical Association and a practicing GP in Pretoria. If anybody would know how serious Omicron is, surely someone on the front lines with communication links with the South African medical community would know. So what does she say?
I think it's a hasty decision. It is like a storm in a teacup. I am practicing in Tshwane, where the epicenter is. And so far what we have seen is very, very mild cases. So not sure why we are all up in arms. We know that there's a lot of mutations, but no one can tell us at this stage whether it means something or whether it's just going to fade away.
That doesn't match the narrative. Could it be more politically motivated and focused entirely on fear-mongering? Why else would South African Health Minister say travel bans unjustified? If the media and politicians claim the worst is about to begin, throw those fear-mongering thoughts of theirs in the bin. Can we trust Pfizer? What motivation does the media have to constantly post fear to pressure the public into getting the vaccine? Most commonly, the Pfizer vaccine. Why can't they be honest, rather than propagate lie after lie to brainwash the public into getting double vaccinated and take ongoing booster shots at that? I wonder.
Is brought to you by Pfizer. CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer. Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer. CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer. This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.
Wait a minute. Could the motivation be greed and money from a company who paid the world's biggest criminal fine of $2.3 billion for illegal marketing in off-label drug case? In the largest healthcare fraud settlement in history, pharmaceutical giant Pfizer must pay $2.3 billion to resolve criminal and civil allegations that the company illegally promoted uses of 4 of its drugs, including the painkiller Bextra, the US Department of Justice announced Wednesday. Could the fact the news outlets that promote this dishonest fear propaganda of COVID being an end of all humanity, unless you take the Pfizer vaccine, and the fact they're being sponsored by Pfizer, be connected? Nah, that can't be it. I must be a conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, anti-science, who just doesn't care about grandma.
Do you think at all that your rhetoric around calling people anti-vaxxers, some of whom were vaccinated, has had an impact at all on vaccine take-up in parts of the territory?
No, and I'll repeat it. If you are anti-mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. I don't care what your personal vaccination status is. If you support, champion, give a green light, give comfort to, support anybody who argues against the vaccine, you are an anti-vaxxer, absolutely. Your personal vaccination status is utterly irrelevant. If you campaign against the mandate, if you campaign against people being vaccinated in vulnerable settings, teachers in classrooms, I'll be really clear, at that point in time, people were actually supporting the idea of a teacher being unvaccinated in a remote community classroom with kids who cannot be vaccinated. I reject that, I still reject it. And if you are out there in any way, shape or form campaigning against this mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax. If you say pro-persuasion, stuff it, shove it. We are absolutely going to make sure as many Territorians as possible are vaccinated. That is our best protection against this thing. And if you look at the Doherty modelling that's only come out since, that says if you double dose 80 in remote communities, 5 and up, I think you'll see our vaccine mandate is absolutely crucial to protecting lives, particularly Aboriginal lives. And I will never back away from supporting vaccines, and anyone out there who comes for the mandate, you are anti-vax.
Don't blink. Don't even blink.
Talking about common good, Wuhan virus vaccines are supposed to be a global public good. But what happens when a vaccine manufacturer starts bullying? Governments are silenced, supplies are halted, and profits take precedence over saving lives. I'm not describing a hypothetical situation here. I am describing what Pfizer is doing. The American pharma giant, it is doing all of this. It is bullying countries to submit to its demands.
Predicting the pandemic, the use of computer models. Let's be real for a moment. Predicting and managing a pandemic before it develops is difficult. Give them a break. Nobody has a crystal ball that can foretell the future. Which brings up the point, how do they make predictions about pandemics before they happen? They use models to run simulations, and based off those simulations, they make decisions on how best to handle the unforeseen. For much of the world, the brains behind the simulation is led by Professor Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College London. Neil Ferguson is a coronavirus expert who was working on Despite Symptoms. Ferguson is a mathematician and an epidemiologist whose work on the spread of COVID-19 is informing policy in not only the UK, but also France, the US, and other countries as well. The centre he founded with colleagues at Imperial College, the MRC Centre for Global Infectious Disease Analysis, collaborates with the World Health Organization. Ferguson has taken a lead, advising ministers and explaining his predictions in newspapers and on TV and radio, because he is that valuable thing, a good scientist who is also a good communicator. Essentially, this man's work directs the most powerful countries in the world on how to act. Ferguson's modelling work is actually what inspired the UK government to go into lockdown. He is an influential man. If he claimed that COVID was going to start giving those infected an overriding urge to dress up in Star Wars cosplay, the government would advise the public to look out for Star Wars cosplay as a symptom of COVID and self-isolate. Important man with a long, fruitful career. In 2002, for example, Ferguson and his team predicted the fallout of mad cow disease, or BSE, in the scientific journal article titled Estimating the Human Health Risk from Possible BSE Infection of the British Sheep Flock. His predictions were mortality to be 50 to 50,000 human deaths considering exposure to bovine BSE alone, with the upper bound increasing to 150,000. And these predictions were used to make decisions around managing mad cow disease. So how close was he? According to an article titled The Flawed COVID-19 Model That Locked Down Canada by the Montreal Economic Institute, or MEI, Professor Ferguson's 150,000 mortality prediction met with an actual death toll of just 2,704. The swine flu had Ferguson predict casualties of over 65,000 in the UK alone. But in reality, it was 457 fatalities. The bird flu. Ferguson predicted 200 million dead, but was wrong again with just 455 dead. It looks like he's wrong quite a lot. Back in 2001, Ferguson worked on modelling for the foot and mouth disease, and he was tasked with predicting the impact of livestock and the death toll on the human population once it transmitted to man. In the scientific journal article, The Foot and Mouth Epidemic in Great Britain, Pattern of Spread and Impact of Intervention, Ferguson recommended hastening or rushing the slaughter of animals with suspected infections to slow the epidemic. But more drastic action, such as ring culling or vaccination around infection foci, is necessary for more rapid control. Culling is predicted to be more effective than vaccination. So the UK took his advice on board and slaughtered 6.5 million cattle, sheep and pigs, some of which were burned on open air pyres. You're probably wondering where I got this information from. It's from an article by the BBC titled, Mass Culling for Foot and Mouth May Be Unnecessary. Looks like Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London was among those advising government on how to control the epidemic a decade ago. But why does it say that the mass cull of farm animals to control the spread of foot and mouth disease may be unnecessary if there's a new outbreak, scientists suggest? He was trying to protect human transmission from a deadly virus, wasn't he? Why is it unnecessary? According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, there is no health risk to humans from foot and mouth disease. However, the damage done to people's livelihoods and food security must not be underestimated, especially in the world's poorest communities. Since the animals don't necessarily die, the losses from foot and mouth disease in terms of daily income and sustenance go largely ignored. So Neil Ferguson's predictions led to 6.5 million slaughtered animals and substantial economic losses to the poorest communities, leading to increased poverty, hunger and desperation, and a decreased standard of living and quality of life. All to protect humans from a disease they couldn't get if they tried. Do you see the parallel? Destructive measures to protect against mild hazards. Now, I can't prove this with statistics or whatnot, but I'd wager that the damage done by the income loss was far greater than what would have happened if the foot and mouth disease did transmit to humans. Why? Because poverty kills. But how does Ferguson's COVID predictions fare? Was he close? Let's see. Oh. Well, at least he's consistent. Keep in mind that this is the man that advises governments how to proceed and what actions to take, and is largely the cause for lockdowns in the UK, US, and Canada. Thankfully, he showed some accountability and admitted he was dead wrong about COVID. My prediction of 100,000 cases per day was wrong, admits Professor Neil Ferguson. Didn't affect his credibility though. Even though his models have never been right, he is still a credible source to the media where he often gives advice on COVID for some reason. Here's a clip where he claims if the lockdown was imposed a week earlier, it would have halved the death toll.
The epidemic was doubling every 3 to 4 days before lockdown interventions were introduced. So had we introduced lockdown measures a week earlier, we would have reduced the final death toll by at least a half. So whilst I think the measures, given what we know about this virus then, in terms of its transmission and its lethality, were warranted, I wouldn't second guess them at this point. Certainly, had we introduced them earlier, we would have seen many fewer deaths.
He sounds very confident in his predictions, doesn't he? Especially about the first lockdown. Even if he's wrong, he at least believes in his work, right? You might suspect so, but I'm not convinced, considering that he broke the first lockdown several times by travelling hours and countless miles to have an affair with his married mistress. Professor Ferguson stepped down from his role on SAGE, the board of scientists advising the government through coronavirus pandemic. At the start of the month, after it was revealed he had broken lockdown rules, he helped to inspire. Antonia Starts visited Professor Ferguson at his London flat while Britons were being told to stay home. Professor Neil Ferguson quits government role after undermining lockdown. Professor Neil Ferguson has quit as a government advisor on coronavirus after admitting an error of judgment. Error of judgment, lol. Hilarious use of words. This man has made a career out of error of judgments. Why are we trusting a man's predictions when he doesn't even trust his own predictions? What a disgusting man. It is people like him and Matt Hancock who break their own rules that suffocate the nation, to the point where the Queen of England is forced to mourn the death of her husband alone while they prance around like vile honours slugs. That highlights the political nature of COVID. Tell me this is about public health, not politics.
Oh my god, you guys. My computer calculations have just revealed that if Santa Claus is allowed to travel from house to house across all nations, he will trigger a global COVID outbreak with a fallout upwards of 20 billion deaths and 140 billion hospitalisations. We must make Santa Claus public enemy number 1, prevent him from destroying the universe and mandating everyone take vaccines from newborns to those over 100 years old. Yes, right you are, Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London. You are so wise and I will do as you say, because you are a scientist and we, the United Kingdom, will follow the science. Thank you, Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London. I have no reason to doubt you and your findings. We as a nation must trust the science. My name is Boris Johnson and I am a dum-dum. That is such a coincidence. I am Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London, and I too am a dum-dum. Dum-dums for life.
Protect the NHS. But why are they still giving characters like Professor Neil Ferguson a credible voice and a platform to spout his science? My assessment? It's because he fuels the narrative of fear-mongering from a scientific lens. To criticize or doubt the official figures is to be anti-science, because Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London said so. You go against that, you're going against science. You're a conspiracy theorist, and you're an anti-vaxxer for simply saying, I don't think I need it, I'm pretty good, thanks. The objective, as exposed by the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour, is fear. They want you to be afraid, and they are trying desperately to make you think the death tolls are higher, the risks are greater, the new variants are more vicious, and the only hope is that you get vaccinated immediately or risk self-inflicted poverty, mental health deterioration, and substance abuse. They are weaponizing fear to control you. In reality, the fear-mongering about the influx of hospitalizations and deaths that will cripple the NHS and claim hundreds of thousands of lives, as seen by the best simulation models available, has resulted in the emergency Nightingale hospitals designed to relieve pressure off the NHS being closed due to not being used or needed. Nightingale hospitals to close from April. The network of emergency Nightingale hospitals set up to cope with a surge of COVID-19 cases is to close from April, the NHS has said. Established last spring amid fears the NHS might be overwhelmed, the temporary hospitals in England were largely not needed. Yorkshire's 500-bed hospitals, opened by Captain Sir Tom Moore, will close next month without treating a single patient. It will operate as a testing centre until then. How can the NHS be overwhelmed due to hospitalisations? And the Nightingale hospitals designed to prevent that closing down due to not being needed both be true? Do you see any other motivation beyond to instill fear in the population?
Didn't you know, Dark Knight? You can't fight fear.
My takeaway is that anyone that supports the government, an entity so notorious for egregious acts of harm, depravity, corruption, and genocide, having full control over who can participate in the day-to-day exchanges of civilian life, to mitigate the outbreak of an inflated and exaggerated virus, is gullible, blind and ignorant to history, and has the kind of blind faith in the government that tomorrow's history books will describe as naive, uneducated, weak, and doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. These losers of history will be remembered, not as the virtuous and righteous champions of public health as they see themselves, but as enablers of a police state where all activities are supervised by a political police force that echoes the mantra that you are sick until proven healthy, and we will destroy your way of life until you comply with our requirements. Sick until proven healthy. What do 78% of all COVID hospitalizations have in common? This is a good leeway into an important question I have for you. What do 78% of all COVID hospitalizations have in common? Is it A, they are above the age of 70, B, they have pre-existing respiratory conditions, C, they're overweight or obese, D, they're unvaccinated? Answer: C, they're overweight or obese. CDC study finds 78% of people hospitalized for COVID were overweight or obese. About 78% of people who have been hospitalized, needed a ventilator, or died from COVID-19 have been overweight or obese, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said in a new study Monday. As clinicians develop care plans for COVID-19 patients, they should consider the risk of severe outcomes in patients with higher BMIs, especially those with severe obesity, the CDC wrote. That's interesting. Keep it in mind for this next part. Who is most vulnerable and how should we act? So what have we learned? Most COVID hospitalizations are in people who are overweight or obese. The most vulnerable demographics are 50 years and up. Is the appropriate response, based on this, to force all healthy to morbidly obese people in all age brackets to get vaccinated, wear masks, social distance and sanitize every surface they encounter? Or Is it to encourage healthy lifestyles and weight loss and promote the benefits of the vaccine to those vulnerable as a result of their age, underlying conditions, or body weight? The reality is that everybody is thrown in the mix. You are just as vulnerable as a 91-year-old cancer patient with a 60-year smoking habit, or a 360-pound man with a 15-year smoking habit and who's addicted to cheese. Strangely, guess how they're promoting the vaccine to the public?
Thank you so much, Randy. Thank you to the whole Shake Shack team. This is really going to help us out. And did you say free fries when you get vaccinated? I got vaccinated. You're saying I could get this? These delicious fries? Wait a minute. But there's also a burger element to this? Let me check with Bill Neathart. Is it too early in the day to eat a burger? No. This could be breakfast? Okay. I want you to look at this and think about, again, some people love hamburgers, some don't. Really want to respect all ways of life. But if this is appealing to you, just think of this when you think of vaccination. Vaccination. I'm getting a very good feeling about vaccination right this moment.
There are entire lists for all the free, unhealthy food you get if you display a vaccination card. Get vaccinated and you can get free Krispy Kreme donuts, free hot dogs. New Zealand has free KFC, and there's even free beer. Now, please tell me how the government's handling of COVID is guided by the science. We are constantly bombarded with follow the science.
It's good. It is all very efficient, very quick. They explained all the risks very clearly. I'd say follow the science and follow the evidence. Listen to the experts. Don't listen to any nonsense or conspiracies or anything like that. What's the alternative to not getting vaccinated? Just living with this and having everyone unvaccinated. It's ridiculous. So have the jab.
Oh no, what have we, the scientific pandemic influenza group, on behavior done to the public? We regret this.
The propaganda has done its job with this guy. Everything I've mentioned so far will be labelled as conspiracy, nonsense, ridiculous, and anti-science. But what about their science? I've done some digging and I've finally found the science that governments like the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada are following. Brace yourself, this is a big one.
Two twos is four sake.
At this point, I've presented my case for why I believe the approaches taken by governments are inappropriate and insane. There is so much more I could talk about, such as the latest Delta variant.
But right now, they're going back to masks, saying it's the Delta variant. Well, there's one large study out of England, from Public Health England, 92,000 patients. And do you know how many people died in the vaccinated wing of this under age 50? 0. Do you know how many people died? There were 52,000 people unvaccinated. Do you know how many people died? 6. That works out to 0.08%, less than the flu. That's under age 50. Over age 50, it was about half as many people died as were dying last year. So the Delta variant is more transmissible but less deadly. But if you say that, Facebook will take you down, they'll chastise you, take away your birthday, and say you're spreading mistruth. But it's absolutely factual. The Delta variant is more transmissible but far less deadly than the virus from last year.
But instead, I'll be going through the reasons why Australia, my home country, and its government, the one who rejected me and left me stranded abroad away from my family and friends and nieces, has completely lost the plot and went full totalitarian. Thank you for watching episode 2 of The Truth About COVID from Stranded Australia. I hope you found it useful, and I hope I did an okay job in proving that the damage caused by the COVID restrictions is far more deadly than coronavirus itself. Along the way, I hope I was able to show that the numbers used to create these figures, 50,000 dead, COVID's going to cause this many dead here, this many dead there, based off of simulations, are probably incorrect. They're probably inflated. And that gave you some doubt that when they say, this many thousands will die if we don't do A, B, and C, it's probably not true. I hope you enjoyed it, and I welcome you to do your own research. The links in the description are there for you. Look through them, see if I'm right, do your own research, find the truth. Because the odds are, it's not what you think. Thank you for watching, and please keep tuned for episode 3, when I take all of my focus on Australia. And after showing the foundation, showing the prediction, I can finally go into how crazy Australia's going, in full totalitarian, in such a way that is impossible to describe. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.